Okay, so the next step is setting up some basic materials for the house, ground and water. I'm going to start with the water. And it's going to be a really simple material. So basically you want the diffuse to be very dark gray, maybe something like 2. You want it pretty reflective. Make sure you enable Fresnel. And the Fresnel IOR for reflections and refractions for water is 1.33. So set that up. That's good. Okay, let's move on to the refractions and increase the refraction value so it's almost completely transparent. I'm also going to enable the effect shadows option so it lets some light through it. Okay, so let's render and see. Okay, right now it's pretty smooth and pretty reflective. The next thing I want to do is add some tint to the water itself, and to do that I'm going to use the fog color and something blue-green, maybe like this should work. Okay, right now the fog is much too strong, and we can make it weaker by reducing the fog multiplier. Alright, let's reduce it further. So the multiplier depends on the scale of the object, not the scale of the scene, so you might have to experiment a bit with this value until you get a nice result. Okay, so it's almost transparent near the edge where the water is shallower, and it becomes more colored as it approaches the deeper areas. Okay, so that's a good starting point. And we also want to add some bump to make the water much more realistic. Right now it looks like a polished surface or glass or something like that, and we can easily fix that by adding some bump. And the most simple way you can do it is by using the noise map. Okay, so this is how the default map looks. And what I want to do is add some smaller variations in the surface as well as keep these larger ones. So enable fractal, and it gives you exactly that. And maybe set it to 4 levels. And let's see how it looks. Okay, looking pretty good. Maybe let's try a smaller size. And that's quite nice. And now I'm going to reduce the amount of bump we have there to make it more calm. And that's pretty nice. Right, so that's our water material for now. So next up is the ground. And for ground, I want the ground to be covered with grass. And I want a nice sandy beach around this front area here and around the pond. So since we have a large area, it would be very difficult to create a single texture for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 tileable textures. One is the sand photo here, and the other one is this ground photo. And to blend them together, I'm going to use the vertex paint. And it's a great way to work these large areas with this vertex paint. Okay, so the way I'm going to do it is I want a higher density of vertices over here, where I'm going to use the vertex paint, and the rest can stay pretty low poly. So let's say I'm going to get rid of the turbo smooth, and I'm going to add an HSDS modifier. It allows you to selectively subdivide some polys of an object. Okay, so let's go to our camera view. Select the polygons as our selection. And just select everything we can see. We do not want to subdivide anything that is not needed. So in this case, everything behind the camera or to the sides is not really needed to have higher poly count. So I'm just going to ignore that. And I'm also going to deselect everything further away from the house. It doesn't need to have these sandy areas. It just has the grass. So basically what's left is something like this. Okay. Maybe even that's a bit too much. Alright, like that. And we're going to subdivide this area quite a bit. So let's say 3 times. Okay, that's good. So as you can see, we have a very dense mesh near the house and near the pond, and much rougher mesh as we go further away. And this is really going to help with the vertex painting, as if your object has a lot of polys, it sometimes gets pretty slow, but since we only have the polys where we need them, it's going to be a bit faster. And we're going to paint a mask. So let's add the vertex paint modifier. So the first thing you need to do to actually see the vertex color in your viewport is right click on your object, select object properties, and change that to vertex channel display. And right now all the vertices are colored white. And we want the opposite, we want everything to be black except the area where there's going to be some sand. Okay, we're going to use the brush tool to just paint in with white color. Right, the brush is pretty small, so drag that up. So something like this. And I'm going to go to my camera view and just paint in the white areas like this. I want the sand to extend up to the porch or terrace. And all around the pond near the water line. Okay, and inside the pond as well. And as you can see, the results are much rougher where there are fewer vertices, and you can get some very precise results here where we subdivided the mesh. So that's the reason why we needed to add that modifier. Okay, nice and smooth. Alright, I think the mask is good. Maybe closer to the porch here. Maybe some sand around the house. Let's paint some black areas. A little strip of grass over here. Okay. And that looks good. Okay. So we can change back to displaying the object without the vertex colors. And let's set up a material with a mix map in the diffuse slot. Okay, sorry. So that's a mix map. And the first one is gonna be our grass texture. Okay, looks like we need to add a UVW map first. So just a basic planar map, like this would do fine. I think the scale is about right. Let's reduce the blurring to get a sharper render. And that's quite nice. Okay, and now we need to add the sand texture to this second slot. Okay, the scale looks okay. Maybe let's reduce the tiling a bit to make the scale a bit larger and reduce the blur to make it a bit sharper. And right now if you render you're not going to see anything, and that's because we need to set up a mask. And for mask we're going to use the vertex color map. Okay, and now when you render, the areas you painted white are rendered as sand, and the rest is green. Okay, so the mask is a bit weird, and I think I'm gonna change it a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna add more grass over here. Less sand over here. Just to make some nice smooth lines. And color some white over here to maybe bring the sand up there. Okay, let's check again. And that's quite good, I think. Right, let's check with the mapping enabled. Very nice. So another thing I want to do is add a slightly wet look to the sand near the water. And it can be easily achieved by using the V-Ray dirt map. Okay, so you have your regular sand right here, and what you want to do is change the bitmap to V-Ray dirt, keep the bitmap as submap, and move it to the unoccluded color slot. And in the occluded color slot, or the area affected by the dirt, we're going to use the same bitmap, but we're going to bring down the RGB level over here to make it darker. Okay, so something like this. And let's check and see how it looks. Okay, and I think in this case we need to invert normals for the V-Ray dirt. Okay, and you can see this wet area near the water. So right now it's a bit too uniform, too smooth, and this is where the dirt radius comes in. And I'm going to use a regular noise map here, set it to fractal, re-render, and you can see a much more realistic result. Maybe let's increase the radius a bit. And for the fractal map, maybe let's reduce the size, let's say 50. And that's great. Okay. And the final step for our ground is adding some displacement only to the sanded areas. But to do that, first we have to create the displacement map. And it's a bit tricky for a texture with strong light direction like this one. In this case, the light comes from the top. It can be a bit tricky to create a reasonably realistic displacement map. But let's try. Okay, let's duplicate the layer, desaturate it. Okay, and try the high pass filter. Okay, something like this. Now let's bring up the contrast with the curves. I'm going to select the lightest areas. And copy and paste them on top. Now I'm going to duplicate this lower layer, Ctrl J, and invert it, Ctrl I, and set the opacity to 50. And now it sort of cancels out the lower layer. And if we play with the curves a bit for both of these layers, we can get a slightly more contrasty result. Alright, maybe like that. And let's merge them together and increase the contrast with the curves. Again, one more time. It's easier to do this in 2 steps in this case. Okay. And let's make this top layer a bit brighter. And duplicate it. I'm going to blur the first one with Gaussian blur filter. Okay. Unhide the next one, duplicate again, blur with a slightly smaller radius. And let's say this is going to be our displacement map. It's not perfect, but it will have to do. Since we don't have any sand very close up, it's gonna be alright, I think. Okay, let's save it. Back to our scene. And I'm going to copy one of my sand textures to the displacement map slot. I'm just copying so I don't have to remember the tiling settings, and I can just swap the image to the displacement texture here. Right, and let's set it at 1 and see how it looks. You can actually just hide everything else to get a better look. So the displacement, as usual, takes quite a bit longer to calculate than just your regular renders. And it's much too strong at 1. So that means we have to try something like 0.1. It's still quite strong, but looking a bit better. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add another layer on top of this one. Set my color values to medium gray. Fill it and reduce the opacity of this layer to maybe 40%. And this should make the displacement a bit weaker. And let's see how that looks. Okay, we can actually just re-render one small part. Okay, that's a bit better. Maybe let's increase the render size so we can actually see what's going on there. It's still too strong and maybe too sharp, so let's increase the blur to 0.5 and reduce the displacement amount to 0.05. Re-render. And I think it looks pretty good. So the next thing we need to do is we need to get rid of the displacement over there where we have the grass. And how do we do that? We do that with a mix map again. So change your displacement map to mix. Keep old map as submap, and we want the sand displacement to be where the white areas are. So move it to the second color slot. And as the mix amount, we're going to use the vertex color mask. Sorry, that's vertex color, not V-Ray color. Right. And now we should only have the displacement on the sand and not on the grass. Okay, so let's just render the whole thing and see how it looks. Right, so that looks pretty good. With one exception, the ground is slightly going downwards because we had used the black as our first color in this mix map, but in fact we should use medium gray so the grass stays where it is and doesn't go downwards, and the sand is displaced just like it should be. Okay, let's add a slight bump. and make it pretty sharp. And our ground material is finished.